Hello and welcome to another episode of Frontline Calling. Hi, Adrian.
Hi, Jan.
We are both in countries at the moment where elections have taken place or are still taking place. You are in Romania now, already at the airport, flying back home, right? Do I interpret the background correctly? It looks like airport. Okay. I'm still here in my hotel room in Portugal to continue reporting about the elections. But let's maybe start with Romania, or let's start maybe with something both countries seem to have in common, and actually a lot of countries in Europe and around the world seem to have in common. Are the far right parties taking over, Adrian?
Well, I mean, that was exactly the fear here, right? And for many also the prediction that the far-right populist candidate, Simion, would win these elections. Somebody who is totally pro-Trump, who has given a lot of rather pro-Russian than pro-European Union statements in the past, but who was also in a very popular style, given a lot of different stories and opinions on different topics and changing them on an almost daily basis. So one day he says he is rather like, well, not supporting Russia, but like rather in favor of a pro-Russian policy. The other day he changes his mind and says he's in favor of a pro-Ukrainian policy. So basically, totally unpredictable what he actually wants. And he was basically ahead in in the first round of the elections with 40%. The pro-European candidate, Nicusor Dan, was only having 20% in the first round. But now election results came in overnight of the second round that happened yesterday. And suddenly it was, well, a rather clear victory of Nicusor Dan, the pro-European candidate who was endorsed by those candidates who were not able to run anymore. So that came as a surprise. And for those supporting the course, pro-European course, obviously they're very happy at this stage that their candidate won. We were at the celebrations yesterday, or basically in the middle of the night, where people celebrated the victory of their candidate in the center of Bucharest, the capital. Let's listen in.
I'm here to celebrate Nicusor Dan's victory in the election in Romania today.
At least we won't have a president that was more interested in Russia relationship than with the European one.
Our biggest expectation would be to keep open the relationships with Europe and to try and halt any kind of, let's say, Eastern influences that we have.
This is a celebratory cigar, but it's a bit of a sad celebration because it's a great divide in our society. There are a lot of people that went for this propaganda, and now we have to make amends and make the people whole again.
I'm expecting him to find unity between different groups of people that are currently in the country. This is a very divided country, and the election has divided us even further. I think that's a big problem for our country, and I really hope that Nicusor will be able to bring us together.
So you could see lots of joy amongst those supporting the pro-European candidates. I mean, I talked to a young lady there also who said we've gained so much from the European Union, especially the younger generation. It would have been totally crazy if we would give up this in the future. But for now, it seems Romania remains on the trajectory, pro-European trajectory.
But couldn't this also fuel like conspiracy theories that the election was rigged? Because like the first election, I think, was also like that that they had to be repeated, no, after some court decision. Now in the polls, the far right candidate was leading. Will they accept their defeat?
Well, I mean, that's exactly the big question. Initially, the populist candidate said he's not accepting it. Now it sounds more that he is accepting it for this election. This weekend, there are no indications whatsoever that any rigging has been happening or any change of voting numbers. I think it's rather a natural direction that if a lot of candidates drop off, they rather endorse somebody who is more on their favor, and that was not the populist candidate. So I think quite realistic that Dan won this time round. But what you said is actually the story that happened in November, which is much more controversial when we had the first presidential elections here and a right-wing candidate won, surprisingly, landslide victory. And shortly afterwards, a court ruled the election is not valid. It has to be repeated, mainly because of the allegation that there was some Russian influence in the election. The big problem is they never made this information public, their evidence public. They never showed the public what the proof is for this alleged voting influence. I mean, the stories that we hear is that they did a lot of advertisements on TikTok that were not labeled as election advertisements. I mean, lots of things that made people skeptical here, believing that, well, it's not supposed to be that way. And you have to know that in Romania, people are very critical of the system. They became more and more critical the past years. A lot of people are very tired of the policies of the established parties. And hence, we saw a strong push towards these populist candidates, but also to the guy who won the elections now, the mayor of Bucharest, Dan, who is a liberal guy, pro-European guy, but he's also not part of the establishment. He's not following any party, and is one of the few politicians who hasn't been labeled corrupt here. So that shows that there's an overall push in a direction away from the established parties. And you probably remember also in November, when these elections had to be repeated, there was also a massive outcry from the US, from the Trump administration that supported the far-right candidate. Remember J.D. Vance basically spending half of his speech during the Munich Security Conference saying how undemocratic Europe became, and he referred to what happened in Romania. So yeah, certainly a concern, and a major challenge for the country here now will be to unite the country again, because it's still super divided. You have a lot of people, almost like in the US, supporting a populist candidate, and a lot of people having another course. So the question will be, how do they find a path? And I guess that is also a topic in Portugal, where maybe you can talk about the situation there. To be honest with you, I've been only focused on the situation here, how things are going. Maybe a little background, what happened during the elections in Portugal.
Of course, I mean, this was probably not the most important election in Europe, to be honest. We had the Romanian elections, we had the elections in Poland, so the focus was not so much on Portugal, a 10 million citizens country in the south of Europe. But I think it's still interesting to have a look here because a lot of things that you have mentioned I can really relate to. That's what I've been experiencing here as well. For example, that the old party system seems to have come to an end. This is something that was very normal in Portugal for a long time, that there were two parties, two main parties, moderate left, moderate right, and now there is a new player, the far right. And this has caused a lot of instability because the established parties don't really know how to react to it, because they somehow have to cooperate if they want to make sure that the far right stays away from power. But they haven't found the right answer yet, it seems, because they don't want to have a grand coalition between the socialists and the conservatives. Now, another option is maybe a minority government that is kind of tolerated by the opposition, but that has to make deals basically along the way. But it all doesn't sound like a lot of stability. So yes, the far right also has really changed completely the political landscape here. They are at around 23% now, I think. So this is basically and with the socialists, a lot of similarities to Germany. Now, we are always trying to focus here a lot on, of course, crisis regions and foreign policies. So what I'm wondering is, of course, the anti-migration policies, irregular migration, and so on play a big role. But how much do you think like the rise of the far right is also influenced by bigger geopolitical topics, like the conflict with Russia that has led to an increase of prices all over the world, and where many people say, we don't go along with the mainstream EU view that we should continue to support Ukraine. How much do you think this geopolitical issue is also influencing the elections or especially the political landscape in Romania?
The issue of migration is not such a big issue here, but certainly geopolitical issues like especially the war in Ukraine. I mean, Romania is on the very eastern side of the continent, unlike Portugal, that's the furthest country away, I think, from the conflict in Ukraine from a European point of view. Here it is really close, and it's a neighboring country. It's certainly a big issue, and obviously it somehow plays in. But I have the feeling from the talks I had with people here, it's a lot of the overall frustration that happened over the past years, where Romania became a member of the European Union, and you remember there was this huge euphoria all over the eastern part of Europe that this would bring dramatic economic change. It certainly brought economic change here. Things improved drastically, but not in a scale and in a way it did in other countries. Poland, for example, where we saw quite a massive boom in the economy. Here you saw that too, but limited to urban areas. I mean, if you're in Bucharest, it feels like a very European, international, modern city. But the moment you go to the countryside, you notice that this is still one of the poorest countries in Europe. So people were mainly disappointed in the past years that this opportunities that were brought through the European Union, and if we're being honest, also through massive funding by the European Union into various projects, was not used in the best possible way by the political class. I mean, the corruption here I read somewhere it's in some of the rankings, the third most corrupt country in Europe. And there have been so many corruption cases against politicians going on that the overall anger against their own political class is that strong that I think this was the main motivation for most people to vote for populist candidates, saying, let's give him a chance because the others didn't do it well, despite incredible scandals also from George Simion, the populist candidate, who was basically he got physically violent towards some of his political opponents in parliament. He was filming himself once how he threatened another female parliamentarian to rape her. I mean, incredible things where you're wondering how could somebody still vote for a guy who does things like this. But obviously the frustration in the political class was big enough to say, well, whatever, let's give somebody else a shot, can't get any worse.
Incredible anger, obviously, incredible frustration, and a very frightening mix, to be honest, that is really threatening stability all over Europe, and well, yeah, and also a geopolitical level that is, yeah, quite frightening at the same time. I think we have a lot to talk about in the coming weeks.
And also, I mean, the big question will be, as you said, in the next years, right? How will things unfold then? I mean, right now, people here, the pro-European people, are celebrating their victory, understandably, but what comes in the next elections? And I think that's the scenario that we have all over Europe. Yes, maybe there's a tight margin win by the pro-Europeans. We saw that in France. We see it in Portugal, as you said. Now we see it here. But what happens in the next elections? That's also the big question in Germany, I would say.
Absolutely. The tendency is definitely still that the far right is rising. They went from 6% to 18% to 23% now here in Portugal. Like you said, in France, we don't know what is going to happen very soon. In Germany, we have the same tendency. It doesn't look very good at the moment.
But yeah, as you said, it's a topic we should definitely pick up in the future again. I mean, despite the fact that we are mainly reporting from more like war crisis zone areas, I think this is also a topic we will keep on having an eye on.
It's also a big crisis, of course, and it's all interconnected, of course, to the global crisis. So yeah, it makes sense to speak about it.
All right, Jan, I have to head to my plane now. I wish you a good remaining time in Portugal, and let's catch up soon again.
Thanks a lot, Adrian. Thanks, of course, as always, also to our viewers. And yeah, have a good flight, and I see you soon.